Hi, I'm here to talk to you guys about unethical business practices at Nike and how they resolved those issues. They have a lot of scandals involving environmental issues and treatment of employees overseas. At first, there was a global shift in footwear manufacturing that started in the 1960s, where it was cheaper for companies to have their shoes produced in developing Asian countries where you could pay their employees less and, I guess, treat them worse because these were growing economies and the people there would be willing to be paid less than they would in America. Production moved offshore in the 1960s to Japan first, and then when Japan got expensive, they went to Korea, and then when that got expensive, they went to southern China and eventually then to other low-cost Asian nations like Vietnam and Cambodia. By the mid 1980s, Korea and Taiwan produced 45% of the global footwear exports, and the goal for Nike here was to remain competitive and to reduce labor costs. Nike's early role in overseas production, it started when they pioneered offshore manufacturing due to Japanese production experience, but they ended up moving from Japan to Vietnam, Indonesia, and China because Japan then got too expensive. Extensive subcontracting made oversight difficult because they would pawn off the oversight to these other factories that would then make the shoes, but Nike had no real idea of what was going on in there. And there were reports of poor conditions, child labor, and worker abuse. The rise of sweatshop awareness happened in the late 90s when Kathy Lee Gifford brought the scandal to public about child labor. Sweatshop labor became a widespread issue beyond Nike, and Nike's visibility and popularity made them the main target for criticism. There was a lot of public backlash to this. In 1993, the CBS company report revealed abuses in Indonesian Nike factories. 3 years later, Life magazine had an expose of Pakistani children stitching soccer balls by hand. There were protests, boycotts, and failing consumer trust. And New York Times did an op-ed that also scrutinized them further from there. Some factory issues in Vietnam came up as well. A leaked Ernst& Young report exposed chemical exposure to workers there and safety violations. There was a New York Times front page report about this actually, which highlighted failures in Nike's oversight and code of conduct enforcement and accused them of unsafe conditions, incredibly low wages, and abusive practices towards the workers. Universities that were Nike schools were no longer Nike schools. They cut contracts and signed with other companies, and there were protests widespread about how Nike was able to get away with this. Their revenue dropped 50%, their stock market plummeted, and 1,600 workers got laid off stateside, which prompted major PR and reform initiatives. Nike took many corrective measures into making sure that their image will recover from this and how to prevent something like that from happening in the future. They implemented a stricter factory monitoring to these overseas factories so they kind of know what's happening there. They joined the Apparel Industry Partnership in 1996, which was a conglomerate between them and a few other companies that were focused on ethical practices in the manufacturing industry. They collaborated with the Global Alliance for Factory Reviews. So they would have a third party go in and make sure that what they were doing in their factories was like ethical. They engaged with student activists at these universities that used to be Nike schools that weren't, and were able to outreach and get a lot of those contracts back. In 1990, to combat environmental concerns from these mass production, they created the Reuse a Shoe program, which they would take shoes and then recycle them into other shoes. I know Nike still does this today. And a bunch of their shoes are like recycled from old ones, and they use sustainably focused product standards, and their goal was to have all products to meet sustainability guidelines by 2020. The solution was compliance and industry standards. In 2000, Nike became the first company to disclose all collegiate product factory locations. So if your school is a Nike school or your university is a Nike university, you can see exactly where these products came from. This transparency intended to improve monitoring and motivate factories to, get their stuff together. This encouraged industry-wide disclosure practices where this wasn't happening just at Nike, but because they pioneered it, a bunch of other companies then felt the need to correct it. Nike aligns its code with the Fair Labor Association, and their new long-term goal is to unify industry-wide labor standard. Although they still have backlash for their production today. I know a lot of it takes place in China in these, I wouldn't exactly call them labor camps, but it's not good what they're doing in China right now. So activists continue to pressure Nike for their working conditions. Thank you for listening, and this is the one source I used. Have a nice day.